All right, so this lesson is entitled The Brahman Period, and this is part one of a four-part series on classical India. Now first let's go back and review who the Aryans were. And you know about the Aryans from our ancient India lesson that you did as part of Unit 1, right? And the Aryans were Indo-European invaders, and they came from right around the Caucasus region between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. And this is just a little bit south of modern-day Ukraine and Russia, right? And they brought with them a culture based on cattle raids and warfare and strong drink. I mean, these are kind of manly men. And they're also credited or discredited with developing the caste system. And, you know, there's some disagreement about how the caste system started, although some historians argue that it was an early form of racism because the Indo-Europeans were of a lighter skin than the native peoples of India, who they pushed probably further south. And then the Aryans kind of set themselves up here. You know, the caste system has this, you know, these levels of, you know, the Brahmin, and then the warrior kings, and then the aristocrats, and then the workers, and then the untouchables, the lower caste. And the caste system, along with these Vedas, turns into Hinduism, right? So Hinduism is a later name for what was originally, you know, historians referred to as the Vedic religions, right? And these were based on the Vedas, which are a collection of poems and hymns to the gods. And the Vedic religions were led by these Brahmins, who are the priests and performed the rituals and read the Vedas. And as I said, the Brahmins were at the top of the caste system. One of the things we're going to see about India throughout the course is this is a very, very religious civilization when we compare it to other world civilizations throughout history. Right, but I want to turn our attention now to the kingdoms of the Ganges, right? Remember that civilization in India started here along the Indus River. This were the locations of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Right, but we're going to turn our attention here to the Ganges kingdom, so-called named for the Ganges River, right? We know about the Indus River. The Ganges is the other important major river in India. And these, you know, were small local kingdoms up in the north. They're right at the foothills of the Himalayan mountains right here. And these kings held unlimited power. I mean, these were brutal warrior kings, very much in keeping with that Aryan tradition, but a kind of unstable kingship. They were constantly threatened with assassination and revolt. So this time period saw a lot of turmoil in northern India. Right? But throughout the kind of rock and roll, violent, crazy lives of these kings, the Brahmins held a lot of power. Remember what I told you, right? The Brahmins are at the top of the caste system. They held a lot of behind-the-scenes power, too, and that's a major theme in this course, right? We look at kings and emperors as having the kind of in-your-face power that everybody knows about, but very often these Brahmins or these concubines and eunuchs in China or these priests in Europe are going to have a lot of behind-the-scenes power. You know, I'll leave it to you to think about whether or not it's better to have up-front power that everybody sees or that kind of quiet, hidden power. Very often the quiet, hidden power doesn't get you assassinated, so there are some advantages to that behind-the-scenes power, right? But these Brahmins were tutors and advisors to the kings, right? And they were the literate members of society. They were able to read Sanskrit, which is the language of the Aryans. Here's an example of what it looks like. And these were the administrators and the bureaucrats, like I said, the quiet power in most civilizations, kind of similar to the Shi or scholar gentry of China, right? Very often in Europe, too, it's going to be the priests that serve as the bureaucrats and the administrators. You know, and like I said, they have access to a knowledge of the will of the gods. That's very important in ancient and classical civilizations, right? If God talks to you, you've got a lot of power because then you can tell everybody else what God thinks. And so that's part of why we call this the Brahman period, is because they are the dominant power throughout India, even if it is a behind-the-scenes power. Right, so a quick review of the caste system here. Remember, this is a hereditary system, meaning you're born into it. And it's, this shows who's on top, who's on bottom, and this is social. This has to do with social power, but it also has to do with political, and then because of that, it has to do with economic as well. So, the caste system really defines India at almost every level of the spice framework that we use to think about this, right? And this was also a time period when we saw increasing wealth within India in the southern kingdoms as well as the northern kingdoms up along the Ganges, right? You got increased trade, you've got labor specialization. You know about that from our ancient history lessons, especially in the merchant and artisan classes. And when we talk about artisans, we're talking about carvers, weavers, leather and metal smiths. The people who make things, the early, this is before manufacturing with machines, but the people who are manufacturing things literally by hand. We're starting to see more wealth here, and it's broken up along the, the vertical lines of the caste system. And I'm telling you this a lot because it's going to have a lot to do with Buddhism, which we're going to look at in the next lesson. So you can keep in mind that once again, there's kind of growing gaps between rich and poor. We talked about this with China, talked about this with Rome, we talked about this with Greece, we talked about this with modern America. So you should be seeing a pattern emerge there, right? And so let's do a quick review of some of these cultural characteristics of India. And we read about this when we read about the caste system in our ancient studies of India, right? This concept of the Dharma. This is kind of just a list of vocab terms here, right? Your Dharma is your life path. In Europe, we might call it one's fate or one's destiny. But in the Indian tradition, it's based on your previous lives, which seems kind of strange to us in the West because we think we only have one life. But the Indians believed in reincarnation, which is rebirth, literally being put back into the flesh again, right? That C-A-R-N in Latin is literally the word for meat. Right, so you're put back into the flesh again. Right, in the Indian religions, they believe that we're reborn. Our soul, our body dies, our soul goes out into the afterlife, but then it comes back into a human body based on, the merits of what we did during our lives or our sins. If you were a good Brahmin, you'll be reborn a Brahmin. But if you're a bad Brahmin, you might be reborn as an untouchable, and then you have to work your way up through the caste again. And this is because of one's karma, right? We use karma kind of as a slang term in the West, right? It's the balance of the good and evil deeds that you do in your life, right? So this kind of, these three vocab terms really define all the religious systems of India, particularly Hinduism and Buddhism, which is what we're studying here. Once again, it's a very patriarchal culture, from the Aryans, right? But they also believed in asceticism, right? Sacrificing one's life to the gods. And often when we see images of India, we'll see these ascetic, wandering, holy men that kind of dress in very simple robes, and they're very skinny, and they just wander around and beg. Very similar to, the monks of, early Christianity. Supposed to be poor, supposed to be dedicated to God or the gods or whatever, some similarities there. And so that's it. Kind of a short lesson. This connects us to the classical period of India. This connects us to the ancient period of India, and we're getting set up for the introduction of Buddhism, which will be the focus of our next lesson. So thanks for watching.